Yeah, I'm doing all right. I'm a bit cooler than last week, but still very, very warm.
Yeah, it's horrible this weather. It's like living in Satan's ballsack.
It
Yeah,
is.
and not in the fun way. Yeah. Ugh.
It's times like this. It's times like this that I wish I had the same problem as Prince Andrew because my sheets wouldn't need changing every night then.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Bless him. Yeah.
Yeah.
By same problem, do you mean having lots of pedo
Non,
friends? And
no, non-sweaty, non-sweaty
oh,
problems. The other problems, he can keep those.
did you say non-sweaty or non-sweaty? Um,
That would have been great in the interview, wouldn't it? And what happened in the Falkland Islands? Well, I got PTSD, which made me a non-sweaty. It left me with the inability to work out how old people are. You know, things like that. That would be
ah,
another such excuses. And such reasons why I'm not going to get a knighthood.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It wasn't you in Greece, was it, this morning, shouting, what was it? Get back to work, you fat ponds.
No, which it was. No.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's some things that I wish I'd written and wish I'd said, and that's up there with them. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The other one is Jerry Sadowich's one, which he did in about 95. I was talking to someone about it. As you know, the whole Jerry Sadowich thing, I think it's just ridiculous. But
Yeah.
but he did one where he was doing his card trick and someone it was Phil Walker, actually Roy Walker's son was telling this. He went to see him in London in about 95 and some American tourist stumbled in through a fire exit and without breaking an absolute beat, he's doing the middle of doing his card trick and he just looked up and went, "Did anybody order a cunt?" Oh yeah.
Yeah, well,
All
no
kind
wonder
of.
it's been cancelled at the Fringe then. Yeah, with things like that.
Oh no, I mean yes. Look, I'm all of that kind of thing. Of look, I'm just gonna, because we do like to put our own little statements out about certain things. This is the way that I see it. If you're a venue and you don't want to bring in someone like Roy Chubby Brown, or you don't want to bring in someone like Jerry Sadowich, fine, it's your venue. You have the absolute right to say who gets booked and who doesn't get booked. But
Yeah.
if you book them, you got to let them do their run. You can't cancel them because a minority have complained about something because the majority didn't complain about it. And so you know what you're getting when you go to see Jerry Sadowich. You're going to get a very angry Scotsman who's going to swear an awful lot and tell some very, 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 very dodgy jokes. You know that before you go in. So, and the warnings are on the poster. So to actually cancel him on that, I thought was very, very bad. And because they'd accepted the booking and they'd already done one show.
I fully agree. I mean, I've not seen Jerry Shadowitz live. I've seen him on TV once, and he almost killed me. I'd had a couple of beers, and I was in a very merry mood, and he
Yeah.
said this joke that got me laughing so hard. I actually ended up on all fours, almost vomiting, and yeah, couldn't breathe. It was just that good. And
Yeah.
yeah, he's going to say things that I disagree with and things that I think, well, that's not particularly funny. But I don't care that he's saying those things because he says the funny things. And yeah, that's what we should be celebrating.
Yeah. And it's freedom of expression. It's not this whole kind of narrative thing they got going on about freedom of speech is absolute nonsense because the freedom of speech means that he means it. He doesn't mean it. He's a comedian. It's freedom of expression. It's artistic right. That's what he's doing. He's doing what he does on stage is no different from. And again, we're gonna just bring this in as well. It's no different from what Salman Rushdie did with his
Satanic verses.
Satanic Verses. And I equally stand by Salman Rushdie, and I equally am deplored by the actions that went on this week regarding him, because
Absolutely.
as artists, you have to have the ability to be able to investigate and express opinions that you don't necessarily hold yourself, because these are characters that you're trying to put across within a particular narrative, either to poke fun at it or to bring up serious issue. So, yeah, people getting in the way of artists, I think it's just terrible.
It's yeah. I mean, J.K. Rowling sort of said how awful it was, and somebody said, "Don't worry, you're next," with
Yeah,
a lovely little death threat, which is just obscene and appalling. And yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I know her opinions are controversial to a lot of people. I've not actually seen. Well, no, that's not true. I've read up on some parts of it, and I can understand why people see it as controversial. But she's entitled to her opinions,
Yes.
and yeah, this whole cancel culture thing boils my pish.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's one of those things of, I don't completely believe that a cancel culture exists entirely. I think there's an awful lot of bullshit stated with on both sides. The whole woke and anti-woke kind of thing. I think there's a huge amount of that is just bullshit in the press where they're
Yeah.
trying to create a story out of nothing. But then you do get these ones across. You do get these things across. Like I say, death threats to J.K. Rowling. No, just don't buy her fucking books if you're unhappy with her.
Yeah.
That's your right. Your right is to don't give them money. That's how it works, you know. But don't stop other people having the. I was like, I don't like Twilight. I think the books are bloody awful. I can't stand the whole success of it. I can't stand the films. But you know what? I will never, ever, ever try and stop someone reading it if they're enjoying it. It's
Yeah.
their right to that entertainment. I have no rights over that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually get this whole, and I know we've not started talking about the book yet, but fuck it. I don't get this whole idea. I think it was either last week or the week before when the Quidditch League had decided to change their name to Quadball.
Yes.
I mean, if so that they can distance themselves from Rowling. Now, if you're that pissed off with her, in that case, stop playing Quidditch. I mean, the reality is the Quidditch that you're playing, you're not actually flying. You've got a broomstick between your legs whilst you sort of like dance along as though you're flying, but
Yeah.
you're not really flying. So yeah, I don't quite understand why people need to change the name of that.
It makes no sense anyway. I mean, Quidditch doesn't make any sense anyway. If you're going to have a go at J.K. Rowling, have a go at the actual, the actual art itself, not the artist. I mean, Quidditch itself. I always thought that. I always sat there and thought, so all you got to do is catch the golden snitch. The rest of it is just some sort of reason for beating each other up. It's just that because it makes no odds how many you score at all. Because as soon as you catch the golden snitch, you win. So, and how does
Well,
that
that's
work?
not technically true because in Order of the Phoenix, I think it was, or was it Half-Blood? No, it was the Order of the Phoenix. Um, yeah, although Crumb catches the golden snitch and ends the game, his team still lost. Not that I've read these books
How?
because because the Irish team had got more points through.
Well, isn't catching the snitch get you like Godzillion points and
No, only 150.
unless you're Harry Potter?
No, Harry Potter wasn't in the cup final. Yeah,
Oh, that's
um,
right.
yeah. Wow, we've really gone down a fucking rabbit hole.
We go down a rabbit hole. Anyway, the whole point is that people running around with a broomstick between their legs, hardly chasing a golden snitch because those things don't even exist, and then trying to disassociate themselves with a piece of fiction because it's Quidditch. It's not even J.K. Rowling's opinion, Quidditch, is it? Really? It's like whatever her opinion is on the trans issue, which is all very new and everybody's still trying to figure it out. But
Yeah.
that's not Quidditch, is it? And that's not Harry Potter. That's got nothing to do with. You've got to separate the art from the artist occasionally.
And I mean, even if you look at the game of Quidditch, and I know I'm saying this as an apologist for J.K. Rowling because I like it, but if you look at Quidditch, it's a sport that's available for both boys and girls. It's not like soccer in the United Kingdom, which in the last year or two, we've started realizing, oh, women play this game as well. And I'm not saying women haven't been playing it for a while.
I am going to sit there and say I've been an advocate of women's football since I was a teenager.
But there weren't many crowds at those matches, were there?
No, but they have started, and actually, it's since some of the big clubs decided they wanted a piece of it because you had your Manchester Cities and your Manchester United suddenly put a lot of money into the game,
Yeah.
which is the whole thing. Is the whole thing, isn't it? We all sit there and go, "Oh, bloody Premiership football and all that," and let's go to women's football was not Premiership football, and they still weren't going to watch that. So everybody can shut up about money in the game because it's in the game. It's not real money. It's somewhere else. But now that money's being put into women's football and we're seeing the success out of it. But
with the
Quidditch
Quidditch,
itself, no. But I'm gonna go against what you're just saying. Yes, okay, it has men and it has women playing on the same team
yeah,
within those things, but it also has violence towards women within that game, which is completely overlooked. And also, I don't think it's that one, is it? But there are kind of really dodgy things like love potions, which are rather problematic in the whole wizarding world. But it's also very elitist as a sport, isn't it? It's not a sport. You don't get like there's not like a wizarding comprehensive.
of course it's elitist. It's a private fucking school. It's a fucking castle. You expect it to be elitist.
It's all elitist. It's all elitist. Everything about Harry Potter is very
They're
elitist.
not playing lacrosse, are they? Or playing something? Yeah,
But that's it. They are actually, aren't they? They're playing the version of lacrosse.
Yeah,
yeah. So,
and what's wrong with elitism?
Well, I'm a very kind of working class gent in that respect. A lot of the time, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not overly keen on elitism in a number of things. In saying all of this, in saying about all the problems that appear within the Harry Potter universe, like I say, love potions, yeah, they're a little bit roofy, aren't they?
They are.
Yeah,
which is one of the frowned upon. Yeah.
In all of that, in all of this stuff. At the end of the day, it's one person who's written a story that a lot of people have been entertained by. And that, to me, is the single most important thing.
Fully agree.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that. Because actually, to be perfectly honest with you, what we've been reading this week really, for me, does fall into the problematic side of things. But let's talk about it after this.
Oh, my God, we're on to the fucking story.
Yeah, I mean, wow, what a beginning that was. So, anyways, you made it this far.
Yeah.
We're going to discuss this, and it will have the spoilers. It doesn't appear to be any form of audiobook, so I have done another reading. You will find
beautiful reading. Yeah, it's really, really good reading. Yeah.
And the Aah and Col reading list, you'll find that. And also in the Aah and Col reading list, you will find the Tales of the Unexpected episode, which is an adaptation of the story Death Can Add. So I put both of them in the reading list so that you can do the comparative yourself. And that's what we're going to do. However, if you haven't done that yet, and you want to do that before we start talking about it because there are spoilers, we're going to have the test card now. We're back, and now we're going to talk about it. So, do you want a synopsis?
I would love a synopsis, please. Yeah.
Do you want a synopsis
of the TV or of the short story?
Now, you see, that was what I was going to say. I don't know. I tell you what, I do the generalization of the synopsis.
Right.
And then we can discuss the details of the differences in between.
Yeah, please.
But the generalization of the synopsis is Oliver is quite good at accounting.
Yep.
Has worked out a way of ripping off his employers for large sums of money. He gets caught by somebody who's also a crook that blackmails him for, stealing all this money. And as long as he gets a massive cut, everything's fine. And to get out of that, Oliver builds a bomb. And in that, he meets a woman that he really likes. And so he builds a bomb that he puts in a briefcase. And he gives the briefcase to the wrong one. And then they get away, and they're driving away, getting away from the firm. And then the woman he's driving away with that is running away says, "Oh, by the way, just before we left, I better tell you this now, I nicked the wrong one's briefcase." And he's like, what? There's a bomb. And then it all ends.
Brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the basic story for both.
Yes.
So, this is going to be an interesting one. First of all, what did you think of the short story?
I thought the short story and the TV show were both excellent. I don't know if I would have put them into the branch of horror. I don't know whether I would have said they were horror stories, but I thought they were just fun. The Tales of the Unexpected one, it was for anybody who's ever watched them, if you're sort of like thinking, well, I remember that Tales of the Unexpected was on, but I don't remember exactly what happened in one. This is one of those where you remember it was on and you don't remember what happened in it. You know that there's something coming towards the end. You know that there's going to be this twist towards the end, which I like the twist, and I was there. It's almost like what ruined M. Night Shyamalan's films, with the fact that you know that the twist is coming, and you're there thinking, well, is it going to be this twist? Is it going to be that twist? And by the time you get to the end, you've gone through 15 or 16 different permutations of what it could be, and one of them was right. So you just go, oh, yeah, pat on the back, because I did get it. But I also got 14 of them. So I liked it. I thought the characterization in the short story was unusual, but so well written. Phil Ketchum has done a brilliant job with that, because you've got somebody whose ambition in the short story is to become an accountant. And you're there thinking, you boring little fucker, why haven't you got a real ambition to do something? But then you find out he doesn't just want to be an accountant, he wants to be a slightly dodgy, corrupt accountant who's got to line his own pockets. And yeah, he's doing that. So I liked that. I liked so many things about this one. I was thrilled that you picked this story.
It's a very interesting one, isn't it? Because I enjoyed reading it.
Yeah.
And like I say, I know you say it's a beautiful read. There were so many edits. I had this whole thing where I'm doing sight reading on it, and I realized I was doing. You're reading the word, and it's for some reason, and you don't realize you're doing it until afterwards, and you're drawing everything out. Yeah, I mean, the idea of actually having an accountant as your protagonist was genius, because that is the whole. Sometimes you think they go, it's the most boring. Even his dad in the short story is like, that's the most boring thing in the world, and you want to carry on reading. You just you're interesting to know why on earth does this child, effectively, because he's 16, something like that, why on earth does he want to be a businessman? And then it does the foreground. It does, or foreshadowing, actually. It's more of a foreshadowing, because he rips his dad off for $10.
Yes.
In the short story. And that, I thought, what was really interesting, we'll come on to the problematic bits of it in a minute, but what I found interesting is, because I read it and then watched the adaptation.
Yeah.
Which order did you do it?
Same way. I listened to you reading it, and then I watched the adaptation.
Right. So you kind of know. I'm actually thinking, no, I didn't, did I? I actually did, because I made Heather watch. I made Heather watch Tales of the Unexpected. No, I watched it and then read it, so I knew the story was coming. But that was the interesting thing, is even though you knew what was coming, it was how they're going to do it, because of the adaptation side of things. And particularly, I wasn't expecting it to be American, having watched the Tales of the Unexpected. And I'm wondering, did you find that the other way around? You weren't expecting it to be British in the Tales of the Unexpected?
I wasn't expecting it to be American. When you were reading it and you said dollars, I was thinking, well, what the fuck are they doing with dollars? I'm sure they should be British.
Because I wasn't doing American accents. That was the...
Yeah. But no, that did jump out at me a little bit, but it was just that one small nuance. So yeah, I didn't think there was anything off with that.
Yeah, it was very interesting in the way that it worked, and I agree. To be perfectly honest with you, you said, I know it's not a horror story, but we read weird tales, not necessarily horror stories.
Yeah,
we can read science fiction in this one, and what I liked about this one is it was one of those. It's a twist ending. That's the point of it.
Yes.
Sometimes twist endings are really annoying if there's no evidence of what's going to happen beforehand. This one, that didn't matter. The whole thing, it hinges on the fact that there is no evidence that this is what's going to happen.
Yes.
I thought the ending in the short story was better, because in the and I'll explain the difference. In the short story, Leela, the woman that he falls in love with, we'll get onto the women in a minute, she thinks she killed the wrong one, whose name I just can't remember off the top of my head. Right? So she thinks she's killed him and then stolen the briefcase at that point. because he's tried it on with her. She didn't like it. She's gone in to give him a piece of her mind, and then hit him with a paperweight.
Yeah.
And taken it. In the adaptation, she just steals it off him when his back's turned.
Right.
And that leaves a little bit of a hole in terms of, well, the guy still needs to get to the airfield, and now he doesn't have a briefcase. That's supposed to be his getaway money. Because in the adaptation, it's £250,000 to the $100,000 that's in the original story. The original story is about 1963. It's about 1980, 1981 that the adaptation was made. So, but it did leave that little bit of a plot hole in terms of this irate guy that's now still alive, wondering what the fuck's happened to his briefcase, and he's a wrong 'un, and he can still cause all sorts of problems and issues, even though, the bomb goes off and blows the original bomber up in that respect. Where in the short story, that was tight, that was, thought about, and it didn't leave that bit hanging because she pretty much killed him, or thought she'd killed him.
Yes, yeah. I suppose there was ambiguity in the short story where she says she thinks she's killed him, so we don't know. Whereas, in the TV show, there's no ambiguity, as you say. We're just left thinking, oh, she's fucked off with his briefcase, and what's he going to do? But I suppose what's going to happen to that character anyway?
It's a tiny little thing that, it's not a major thing. It's not like in some other things where you see major plot holes, like the majority of Star Wars, for example. Every time they bring out a new Star Wars thing, all it does is create huge problems for the narrative all the way through, because they never seem to try and align anything up.
Is Star Wars the one with Picard in it, or is it the one with the swing bin and the metally shiny man?
It's the swing bin and the metally shiny one.
Cool.
Battlestar Wars or something like that. Anyway, but the whole thing is, it's kind of like they always do something that has massive implications when you think about it. You sit there and go, well, actually, if that's happened here, and we're now the classic one for me is always Leia is Luke's sister, because in the first film they're getting it on, and so the idea of making that retro change, retconning it, has massive implications on something else that's already happened. Where that particular thing doesn't have massive implications. It's just one of those, if you really think about it hard, the one that's got a bloody mess left at the office, you can understand why there'd be confusion for an hour, going, they don't know what's happened, an unconscious man bleeding, possibly dead, they don't know who's involved, and the time it's taken for the car to get to where it's got before it explodes doesn't have any chase sequence at that point because there's confusion. Where in the one where she's just half-inched it with the briefcase, he is able to give chase at that point. He is left in an ability to be able to actually hunt them down, and it's an hour as well, so it's a good period of time, and it wouldn't be something that would be long before he noticed, because let's face it, 250 grand in a briefcase is something you're keeping an eye on. So she's half-inched it, it's now suddenly not there. He's a clever guy. He'll be right. Where's Oliver got to? To hunt him down. So that's why it just left that open a little bit, but only if you're like me and you spend most of the night thinking about it rather than sleeping.
I think one of the things that I preferred about the way the short story was written to the TV episode was that, with the fact that she's gone in there and twatted this bloke across the head with a brass paperweight, and he might be dead, that makes her morally questionable.
Yes.
And yeah, he's tried it on with her, and she's sort of like knocked him back. And we're in a time period when people are watching Benny Hill, Benny Hill shows were sort of like showing that sexism is the normative of that period.
The rest of the story is rather misogynistic, to be fair.
But yeah, with that short story, because she actually smacks him across the back of the head, has potentially killed him, in that case, she is potentially deserving of the fate that she eventually gets when the briefcase sort of like goes,
it's a little bit psycho in that respect, isn't it, actually? Because I mean, this is what, 1963, 64, and Psycho was about 63 as well, actually.
I think it was, yeah.
Because the whole opening sequence of Psycho is the fact that she's stolen a load of money off her boss.
Yeah.
So when she gets killed in Psycho, there's actually this moral kind of twisted nature to what's happened. She has had a comeuppance for breaking the law, but she's been killed by a psychopath. So it does create this kind of really kind of moral ambiguity in the middle of the movie, which is really clever.
Almost as though society is governed by a god that controls the rights and wrongs of capitalism. And if you break the laws of capitalism, God will smite you with a psychopath.
Yep. I mean, it's a big horror thing, actually, is moralistic tropes. Don't have sex, don't take drugs, don't leave children unattended so that they can die because you'll get a comeuppance. These are all different things that really do sort of like, come back. They have quite a strong moral code quite often, particularly in horror movies. So yeah, you're right. In that moral ambiguity, all she does in the TV version is she's stolen a briefcase, and it's in such short passing when she describes it that you hardly have time to think, oh, there's already somebody planted a bomb. There's already somebody stolen £250,000. There's already somebody who's been embezzling, since they were a child. So the idea that she's just half-inched the briefcase doesn't strike as anything. Where in the short story, she's committed physical violence against somebody. And even like you say, when you read the rest of the story, because honestly, the attitude towards women in that story is dreadful, absolutely dreadful. So when the pretty young thing shows a bit of spirit and smacks the guy over the head, it's quite shocking. And it actually has a much greater shock value, the fact that she's there going, you might not want me because I'm a murderer. The stealing of the money is inconsequential.
It's an oddity. And when you look at it that way, I mean, she's the one that actually commits the crime, because although he's put a bomb in a briefcase and the intent is for him to kill, was it Ian Holm who was playing him in the, I think it was.
Is that Bilbo?
Yeah. She's, even though Oliver has put the bomb in the briefcase with the intention of Ian Holm being killed by that, hers is the more direct approach to murder. And this is not me saying that, I'm not trying to say bombing people is less of a crime. Obviously, putting bombs in places is horrific and is terrible. And but within the world of fiction, you've got the enormity of the real physical contact of, I've got something heavy in my fucking hand, I'm bashing it across your head, which, am I right, or am I just sort of like...
No, I think actually you've hit upon something there, pun intended, that because earlier on in the story, he actually goes to great pains to talk about the moralistic ideas of murdering him. Because he actually does say at one point, the only way out of this is in murdering him, and I can't murder him. It's only that he gets absolutely pushed to the absolute limit that he then decides, bomb, yes, but I shouldn't even be thinking about a bomb. He has a lot of moral arguments about why he shouldn't be killing at that point. Yeah. And she walks in and just out of the blue, as a complete moment of passion, smacks him over the head with a paperweight. So there is a much more volatile nature to her violence.
So you were saying it's problematic and misogynistic. Why?
Just a little bit. I mean, all the stuff when he goes on about enjoying life is so... I mean, to be really honest with you, whether it's attitudes of the time or whether it is... Right, motorbike. Whether it's attitudes of the time or whether it's a stereotype of the attitudes of the time. Like James Bond, for example, has this kind of like idea that he just seduces women left, right, and center, and it's all because of his suave and sophistication. You could argue that it genuinely wasn't like that at the time. That was just a fantasy type male life, which is a misogynistic idea of treating women just as purely as objects. And he has that kind of suave James Bond attitude when he's getting the money. He's not saving any of the money he's embezzling. Not like in the TV adaptation, he doesn't do the whining and dining, and he's actually claiming that he's stealing the money to make more money so that he can put the money back and have a load of money himself, which from an accounting point of view, the way they sell him as this genius accountant makes a lot of sense. But in the short story, he's stealing the money to have a life of Riley. There's one point where he says he's making a respectable income where he can afford a respectable apartment, a respectable car, and have a respectable wife. Well, he bought 2 of those. But how can you possibly decide on a wife just yet when there's so many pretty women? And every conversation about the women is how pretty and I want a woman that's pretty and spirited and has all these different aspects, and then not looking at the woman in the office. And even down to the point when he actually has the first date with her, he commands her to go on a date with him. He actually says, "I'll make it an order. Break the date with the other bloke and come out with me." I don't know if I can. Well, what if I make it an order? I order you to come out as your boss to come out with me. And so there's huge amounts of that kind of sexism in the workplace and all that sort of stuff.
I've got to admit that commodification of women was something that was quite a good tool in the short story, because as I was listening to it, I was thinking, are they both going after the same woman, and is she going to sort of like piss off with the briefcase of money? Because we don't even get the bomb in it at first, do we? He's just sort of like getting ready to give him the money. And I was thinking, is Jan Francis going to sort of like fuck off with the money and leave them both there without a penny? But again, that's because it's a Tales of the Unexpected type thing. You know that there's a twist coming somewhere. And yeah, so I was guessing at those parts. But yeah, you're right. Women were treated very much as secondary characters in that. But obviously part of that's because of the time period. When you look at it whilst it's on the TV, they're in that old Edwardian Victorian type building. It's owned by an old bloke. He's got a right-hand man there. And the only women that you've got in there are secretaries, typists and cleaners.
Yes. But as you know, it's your rule of its time is not an excuse.
Yeah.
So we kind of look at it like that. But I do feel there was a bit of a difference in the way that they were portrayed. You're absolutely right. Is the women only had women's jobs in the TV adaptation of it. That's without a doubt.
Yeah.
But you didn't get to see a lot of the women characters where actually the idea of having this more feisty female that he's looking for, and turns out to be the one that's a murderer basically. But the idea that is so American, actually, the way it's written, and the whole thing is it really does lay the character out quite nicely, because you really get a sense of this guy being a cock, and because the whole thing is he's not a hero, and you're not supposed to like him, even though he's a little bit maybe kind of lovable rogue, and he's getting a bit of his comeuppance when it happens. But it is more. It's almost like a proto-American Psycho. It's like a proto Patrick Bateman in the way that he looks at the world is all about going to the nice restaurants, but away from everyone else, so he can't be seen because everybody knows how much he'll be earning, and he can't be splashing. He is psychopathic in the way that he's approaching his crime, his life, and the way that he sees everything.
Which is one of the things that I liked about. We knew that explosion was coming. We knew that explosion was going to happen, and I liked the way the tension was built on that. I just thought, it was built nicely, but not protracted.
Yes,
I wasn't there thinking, "Oh, get to the fucking end," or "I'm going to fast forward this bit." I was thinking, "Oh, edge of my seat stuff." Yeah, is he going to be able to throw it out? I don't know why they needed the stunt driving in the TV episode.
Because that was. I've always joked that American cars don't have brakes. Because every single time, if they get a blowout, they have to run off the road and hit a tree, and it's just like, do you not have brakes? And that was so typical, that wasn't it? It's straight across the other carriageway, through a fence, down an embankment.
I've worked it out. I know why. Because it was a Mercedes. Yeah. That's how they drive the fucking things, yeah.
driven by a cock. I should know. I used to have one. So it's yeah, we can talk about our own. It's the whole thing, isn't it? You're allowed to joke about your own. So I did once own a Mercedes, and so yeah, we were rubbish drivers.
You've improved now, though. You're onto a proper car now, aren't you?
I'm into a much more a respectable car off my respectable income. So I just and I've got a respectable wife, to be perfectly honest with you. So
Yes.
yeah, everything's pretty groovy. So yeah,
But
yeah,
no,
that was the. However, even though it was problematic, and we've had this before, we've even had this with when you get the racism in early stories and stuff. Because I was reading a report recently about some universities taking books off reading lists, and there was some going up about it. Someone did a. I'm sure there are people in offices going, "What kind of shit Freedom of Information Act can we write and get this week?" So they did a Freedom of Information to find that certain texts have been taken off certain reading lists. They haven't banned them; they're still available in libraries. And reading lists, as you know, you're an educational professional. I'm hoping to go into that creative writing lecturing circuit. You change your reading lists anyway because certain things meet certain criteria, and you want people to actually read and see the mechanisms, not necessarily force a particular book down their throat.
exactly, yeah.
And yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say the news story where they were saying thousands of titles have been taken off reading list. I think it was 2 titles that had been taken off, but they were able to say thousands because that's how many had been printed on those particular.
I think that's what it was. It's the Underground Railroad has been taken off, and it was sort of like because of it has big depictions of slavery and all that kind of stuff. Like, well, maybe it's been taken off because let's face it, right? If you were doing a literary study and you were going to read something like Things Fall Apart,
yeah,
and then part of your study in that, you'll then go, oh, and if you read the Underground Railroad and you use it as one of your references, even if it's not been discussed in class, that means you're going to get a nice mark because you're obviously doing external reading that's extra.
absolutely, yeah.
Yes,
And yeah, as you say, it's not that they sort of like said, "Oh, we're taking off the reading list and every copy needs to be burnt. No one must read this again." Yeah, it's been taken off a reading list because somebody's got a different reason. Yeah, a different text. It's not that they sort of like taken the Underground Railroad off a reading list and they've put all white people are brilliant on the reading list instead.
No.
Chances are something different. Well, which probably isn't a book. I hope it's not a book.
I think All White on the Night would be one.
Yeah. But yeah, something else will have gone on. I mean, I don't know whether it's sort of like put noughts and crosses, which is...
to be very honest with it is a bullshit story. But what I mean is that we've read a lot of stuff that's had racism in it, and I understand taking it out of things like Enoch Blyton and taking it out of things like Agatha Christie because they're immensely popular titles.
Yeah.
And then there was None. Which went through a couple of changes because each title they kept picking was a bit problematic, became problematic. But it's like with this one is look, yes, there are very kind of sexist attitudes going on here, and yes, it is of its time because that's what those offices were like at the time. But that's not an excuse for it. In a way, it's actually a way of going, you know what, it wasn't right back then either. So it's not saying that it's right that he's written this, but it would be wrong to clean that up because
absolutely, yeah,
it is telling you the truth about what the attitude towards women in offices was, particularly still in a lot of offices now, but particularly back in the 60s and through the 70s into the 80s. That whole sexual harassment in the workplace, which is effectively what you're reading at some of that point.
It's very much like that. But as you say, it's an accurate reflection of what the history was back then. Yes. I mean, I remember a few years ago I was watching the Red Riding Hood trilogy. Sean Bean was in the first one, and then obviously he gets killed, so he's not in the second 2. But it was about the Yorkshire Ripper and the way that police were covering the Yorkshire Ripper story. And it showed a news office at the time that was in the mid-70s. And this news office, it was an accurate reflection of one because you couldn't see any fucker for the cigarette smoke that was there. it was just like, I mean, I watched The Fog on TV last night, and yeah, even that wasn't as
It
thick and
doesn't.
dense as the cigarette
Well,
smoke in that.
was it
Yeah.
that Dennis Nilsson one, wasn't it, with David Tennant playing? Is it Dennis Nilsson?
Yes.
Yeah. That made me want to smoke again. It was simple. I used to smoke, and I was watching that, thinking, God, I could really do, really have a fag right now, because that was just just watching them smoke in the 70s and 80s. It's just what it was all about,
Yeah.
really. But
But yeah,
yeah. But that's the whole thing is, and that's where I will actually I'll do it again. I will align it again with American Psycho and the Patrick Bateman thing. Is even though it is misogynistic, the character he's writing about, it's not in the first person, it's in the third person, this one. But of course he's loving it. He's loving going out womanizing. He's loving going out, treating women as nothing but objects. And that's what makes American Psycho interesting, because he's a serial killer and he loves being a serial killer. And it's you're reading it from that point of view. And so even though at the time it was written, most people who read that wouldn't have gone, oh, this is being a bit fucking sexist, isn't it? Right? Now you can go back and read it and say, oh, they were a bit sexist back then. And that's, and there's nothing wrong with it. But he enjoys being that way. And I think that this is something that I think this is where the critical thinking comes in over creative thinking, is you really do have to be able to do that. Well, yes, it was different back then, and treat it as such, but not treat it as in the attitude of then, but just accept that things were wrong back then. And that you can read it from that point of view and understand that that is how some people genuinely thought and genuinely acted. And it was wrong. You can still feel wrong about it now, but let's not ban them and sanitize them for that reason. Read them and understand that that's what it was.
yeah. I mean, on a similar note, I was going through the Jeeves and Wooster books, which are just hilarious. There's one of them where Bertie puts on blackface.
Mm.
And I mean, blackface, when you see it on TV, you just think, wow, these are cheap gags that are, are very much of their time. This moved the plot forward. Bertie had been sort of like, he'd gone on board a boat where there were some minstrels who were playing, who were all African American, for want of a better way of phrasing that. That's not the way they phrased it in the book. But yeah, Bertie, he's actually wanting to chat with these minstrels anyway, because he knows that one of them's a brilliant banjo player, and a banjo-lele player, and he wants to play the banjo-lele and wants to take up some lessons. But he gets kidnapped whilst he's on board this boat, as would happen to Bertie. Jeeves turns up, and to try and get him off the boat, presents him with some boot polish so he can black up his face, so he can sneak away with the band when they're taken off the boat. Again, this isn't sort of like saying, oh, we think all black people look alike. But do you know what? The guy who's the kidnapper, who's in charge of this boat, does think that, and isn't going to notice one more blackface amongst these people who are going off the boat. So yeah, you can sort of like see it's problematic, but it shifts the plot forward because it's actually true to the way racist people behaved back in that day.
Yes, and it's one of those kind of strange ones, isn't it? In that, fine, don't make a TV adaptation of that particular episode, because there's also this thing about audiences, isn't there? That's why I say about when you take Agatha Christie, as we just mentioned, Then There Were None, which at one point was called 10 Little Indians. Yes. But before that, it was actually called 10 Little N-Words. We won't going to go that far with it. To the point where
do we think that the editors were going, right, we've had 10 little N-words, we've had 10 little, what about 10 little lesers, 10 little women, 10 little gays,
10 little cripples. No, I mean, even to the point of the original text, the actual island was, the name of the island was awful. And you just think, I can't help but think, even back then, surely it could not have been considered, particularly, the N-word island, for example. You're just like, surely you got to see that that's even then. But that's the world she moved in. That's the whole thing. But the popularity of Agatha Christie's work, I think, justifies editing that afterwards. Even editing it again when it go from the Indians, which is the more recent one. I noticed on BritBox, for example, it's called "And Then There Were None," but when the film starts, the title card says 10 Little Indians, and the poem throughout the entire thing refers to them as 10 Little Indians.
Because... In the more recent version, it's 10 Little Soldiers.
Right. So yeah, but I agree with that because it is a very highly popular mass audience, so you've got to have that and take that into consideration. I think it's not just the art.
Yeah,
the question is whether or not you can get hold of the original text if you ever want to read it, and I'm sure you can.
But also, why would you want to? I mean, if all that they've changed is sort of like the N word to the word soldier now,
yes,
through various changes, is it going to sort of like, oh, well, that's really improved my reading experience of it. I really more understand Agatha Christie now.
But how are you going to make America great again if you can't read that kind of freedom of speech? Yeah. I know what you mean. I do know what you mean. But it makes sense to do it. And there's a load of people that would call it ridiculous that you're changing art in that way or you're changing books. But it makes perfect sense to me. It's something that is that popular has to change. Where something like this, which hardly anybody's ever going to read, doesn't have to be taken up. And, it's like the H.P. Lovecraft stuff. H.P. Lovecraft, in adaptations, takes out a lot of those problematic racist bits. You don't have to change the book because the books themselves are never going to be as popular as the film versions.
Yeah.
That come from them. Then H.P. Lovecraft did not sell. Agatha Christie outsells now J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
So you have to do something with that once you've got something that large. Like you say, if it doesn't detract from the narrative and it doesn't detract from the story, it is literally a cosmetic change. Then fine.
I mean, I just want to sort of like add on to this the caveat that we're both saying this as privileged white males.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know how upsetting it would be if I was there as an Agatha Christie fan. If I was a person of colour reading one, thinking, and then there were none. This sounds like an awful lot of fun. Oh, and this is one of the original. I don't know how upsetting or distressing that would be for me.
I just imagine. What I don't like, and again, I agree with you completely in that statement. As a privileged white guy, right, is one thing I don't want to disappear is the fact that it did exist like that at some point. So, because it's one of those things of Agatha Christie, however much I love her work, these try and choose my words carefully here. Black spots, dark spots. No, hang on. These are moments that can be easily sanitized and they can be lost in history. And I think it's also important to not lose certain things in history. I think it's important for historians and people who study things to be able to go, and anybody has the right to study it, not just an elite, ivory tower bunch, but to be able to actually sit down and go, you know what? Agatha Christie was brilliant writing these stories here, but there were issues in what she was writing in the first time. And actually to be able to say, this is why we can do things like this, and this is why things have to be cleaned up, and this is why we have to be careful in what we say. And so if it all disappears and becomes the nice new version, and I'm not going to use the word sanitized, actually, that's wrong. Corrected would probably be the right thing to say on that one. The corrected versions of it, and if that's all that ever then existed, then you end up with nobody knowing the true history of it, and you just get a false view of somebody's life. I think in that respect,
you have a Baudelarized text, yes. You have something that's been sort of like edited, and and it shouldn't be that way. If that's the way where you end up with sort of like Holocaust deniers.
Yes.
Because people have taken this out of history because it's unpleasant, or they don't like the sound of this, and which is why I will, as often as possible, remark about Lewis Carroll and the fact that he sort of like had pictures of naked prepubescent girls and took photographs like that regularly. We can sort of like say that's something that was popular at the time period because cameras were just coming in. But still, there's a part of me thinking it's a it's a prepubescent girl. You dirty.
It doesn't change it. What it doesn't do is change the story he wrote, unless you want to really try and read things, because the nonsense story he wrote as Alice's Adventures in Wonderland.
Non-story, did you say?
Non-story.
Yeah.
Well, the whole thing is that I've read criticism where they've tried to weave in this paedophilic idea into the narrative, and to be totally honest with you, it's being shoehorned in because there's nothing in there that's that respect. Looking Glass is a little bit more along those lines in terms of he was upset that he couldn't see Alice anymore because at that point. So there's a lot of history that needs to be learned, and it shouldn't be hidden. And yes, you know, Lewis Carroll himself was problematic, but his text wasn't. Unlike Enid Blyton, whose original texts are problematic and needed to be corrected. But we should always understand that the original ones existed, and the original ones are still there, you know, in the way that she had a privileged life view of people of colour.
I've really enjoyed it this week. I have really enjoyed our chat. Yeah, I'm worried that the story that I've selected might not be as as productive.
Well, look, I think, to be perfectly honest with you, we got off to a good start with other things going on in the literary world at the moment.
Yes, we did, yeah.
I like the fact that we're speaking about something that had adaptations. That was really, really nice. And I like the fact that we went into a lot of different creative sides of things. So that was really, really cool. So, Ash, what are we reading next week?
Next week, we are reading, and it's one that I found on YouTube. It's called Calling Card, and it's written by a gentleman called Ramsey Campbell.
Oh.
So yeah, there's a version that's been read on YouTube, which I've not had a chance to listen to it yet. From the comments that I've seen on the YouTube thing, apparently it's a little bit of a Christmassy story, which I think is perfect for August. But yeah, I'm a fan of Ramsey Campbell's work anyway. I think he's a brilliant writer. So I'm looking forward to settling down with one of his shorts. And the reason why I thought a Christmassy one would do is because I'm sick to death of this hot fucking weather.
Yes.
And I sort of like pretend that it's snowing.
And Ramsey is very much, is often described as the link between, he's like the missing link between H.P. Lovecraft and Stephen King, is the way his work has been described.
Well, I don't want to describe him as the missing link because, that's...
He's a nice bloke. Brilliant. So, yes, that's fantastic. So, Calling Card, Ramsey Campbell. Yep. Ash, this has been absolutely superb tonight. Really I've really enjoyed this.
Likewise. Thank you.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.